In this session 3 of today, Dr. Vince Colliano is going to chair the session. So Vince, thank you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank all of you for coming to the very last talk that Martin will ever invite me to give. So I'm going to talk about the birth of the KCs, and I can talk about that because I was there. Yvonne was there as well, so he can tell you it was not a pretty sight. We were just about a year or two after the 6 meetings of IARC Volume 100, which looked at the more than 100 human carcinogens identified to date. And we decided to do some things in addition to just the regular monograph where we would conclude that asbestos is carcinogenic to humans, benzene's carcinogenic to humans. That wasn't so interesting. So what we decided we would do is also, while we're looking at all these known human carcinogens, identify what the tumor sites were that were found in animals and in humans, so we could later go on and decide whether there is concordance between animals and humans and tumor sites, maybe for some kinds of agents and not for other kinds of agents. And the other thing we did was to catalog which mechanisms were likely or established to be involved in the carcinogenicity of each of these. And so about a year or 2 years after the last of those meetings, we got another group of experts together to look at the data on tumor site concordance and on mechanisms and see what we could make out of it. And I was sitting up there at the front of the room chairing the meeting, and I noticed a grumpy guy in the far corner of the meeting, and he was really agitated and grumpy, and got up. He decided this is just not going the right way. I'm going to leave. So the first thing we did, we checked with our administrative assistant about to look at the soccer scores and to see if there was any reason that Martin would be especially grumpy that morning, but no, it had nothing to do with soccer. So at the next break, we went and talked to Martin and says, what's bothering you? And what we were doing at the time, we had been listing the mechanisms that had been identified for the 100 agents. And we were at several dozen mechanisms that could be considered established mechanisms of carcinogenicity. And Martin said, that's just too many. I can't count them all on my fingers and toes. It's just too many. This is not going the right way. So we charged Martin with thinking about it overnight and coming back the next day with a proposal about how we could do something, because we did want to summarize them. So anyway, Martin came back the next day. He says, I got them. I can count them on my 10 fingers. Here they are. And he brought the key characteristics of carcinogens to our meeting. I want to spend a little bit of time just showing you a few of the slides that from IARC from that time. So this was presented at an American Association for Cancer Research meeting in 2010. And we talked about volume 100, and our objectives were to update, as I said, update each of the carcinogens, find the tumor sites with sufficient and limited evidence in humans and animals, and then identify the likely and established mechanistic events. And it was developed over a whole 2-year period by 160 scientists from 28 countries. And we classify an agent based on human studies, on animal studies, and mechanistic and other relevant data, and we come up with an overall evaluation. And we were looking really to the future in that right now, cancer in humans, the human epidemiology studies play a large role, and there's a little bit of molecular epidemiology in humans. And cancer experiment animals plays a very large role, and there's some mechanistic studies as well. And volume 100 gave us the opportunity to correlate the human studies of cancer with molecular epidemiology and the animal studies of cancer with mechanistic events. And so that's really when we can make that kind of correlation, that'll help us in the future when there probably will be fewer human studies, particularly if we try to evaluate chemicals before we wait 20 or 30 years for them to cause human cancer. And there are going to be many fewer bioassays in the future. So the experimental mechanisms, experimental studies, and molecular epidemiology are going to become more important. And volume 100 is one of the keys of establishing that correspondence. So the two scientific publications, basically just look at the last line. In 2010, we said basically, how can we identify carcinogens without waiting until tumors have developed in humans or in animals? And so that really was the goal, a forward-looking goal for the key characteristics, though we're also looking, one of the things that makes the key characteristics of cancer special is that they came out of a systematic evaluation of all the known human carcinogens at the time. So I want to show you the different way of looking at it right now. So right now, human studies and animal studies are the main driver for classifying carcinogenicity. And now we have the 10 key characteristics of cancer that also we can use in our classification. And what we've been doing, what Martin's been doing in the various groups that some of you are involved in, is looking at other kinds of toxicity and developing key characteristics of those. So in the future, we don't have to necessarily look at the human studies and animal studies or wait for human studies and animal studies to be done and argue over whether something's a carcinogen in human and animal studies. We can look at these various key characteristics that are up at the tops of these trees, and we can decide on whether there's a sufficient pattern to identify sufficiently strong pattern to identify something as a carcinogen. So that's the origin of the key characteristics and Martin's role in it. Any questions or comments?
I should say, Vince, that Ivan is here.
Yes.
I think when you said, why don't you spend your evening? So what you did is form a subcommittee, said, we're opening your mouth and saying you're going to leave. You get to spend the evening while we all go out for dinner and beyond.
Well, yeah, I mean, we want to discourage outbursts like that.
So I think Ivan was one of them. I think Steve Peck, and I don't know who the other one was. But anyway, we locked ourselves away in some room and did that. And we enjoyed a very nice dinner in the end.
Yeah, I'm sure we did.
Catch up with you later. Thank you for that. A life lesson.
Yes. Well, thank you for the key characteristics. They've clearly had a very important role in the scientific community in the last 10 years. So I think our next talk is about 10 years of key characteristics of carcinogens, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Kate Guyton, who's been a colleague of mine at the US EPA and at IARC. And Kate?
All right, thank you very much, Vince. And let's see if I can
There, get
get to here.
and you should be